Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I am absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to interview Jamie Sarche, who is a writer, a seasoned speaker, and the director of pre-arranged funeral planning for Feldman Mortuary, Denver, Colorado's most trusted Jewish funeral home. Jamie will be speaking to us today from Denver, where she lives with her husband and their two sons. Jamie's very special calling is to help people be less afraid of death. She feels honored and she is grateful for the opportunity to help people through some of their most difficult days by talking with them about this often taboo subject. And by helping them face their mortality, she helps them to live better, more meaningful lives. Talk about being in sync with the mission of Grief and Rebirth podcast. When Jamie helps people put their funeral plans in place long before they need them, so that they can make educated decisions unclouded by grief, they often lean back in their chairs, take a deep breath, and say to Jamie, "That was so much easier than I expected." I'm looking forward to talking with Jamie about breaking down the taboos about death, funeral pre-planning, how facing their mortality helps her clients to live better, more meaningful lives, her insights and approaches on how to have challenging conversations and address sensitive issues, and more, for what is sure to be a special conversation that can ease the common discomfort many people feel about talking about the often taboo subject of death. Hey, Jamie, a warm, heartfelt welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Irene. I'm so thrilled to be with you today.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. I mean, on this podcast, we talk about death a lot, but we talk about it with hope and that there's more meaning to our lives and it's important to heal. And here you're helping people all the time with this.
Yeah.
In your way.
Yeah. I'm just helping them recognize, I think, that death is part of our life. We live in this society, and I know you know this, that says we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't think about it. It's so morbid. Just get busy living. And I'm a big believer in live, and I also really believe that by recognizing that our life is finite, that someday, who knows when, we're going to die, we're going to live more fully. You do better when you recognize you have a time frame for stuff.
Right. And, in my world, because we've interviewed so many mediums and healers and all, we know you just lose your bodysuit and you are going to go on. So what is the quality of this lifetime that you've chosen to live this time? What is that quality going to be like? What are you doing with your choices? So let's start. And let's have everyone get to know you, because what you do is such an unusual but wonderful service to people. It really is a good deed. So let's start when you were a little kid. Have you always been, you talk about death. Have you always been, have you always been comfortable talking about this taboo subject, including about death, other taboo subjects from your childhood on?
Yeah, I don't know if I always talked about death, but I always did talk about the elephants in the room. Quite honestly, didn't really feel like I belonged in my family. I wasn't a fit for my family. I really was set aside in my family. I never felt secure there.
Wait, tell us more about that. What was that about?
I had real unhappy parents who had a terribly unhappy marriage. They should not have gotten married, and certainly should not have stayed married. They were separated the first time when I was 5. And I remember being thrilled Like I am a deeply empathic person, and I'm quite certain that I have been around a long time because, in many lifetimes, because I just knew things as a small child that I shouldn't have known. And so watching my parents, I knew that my family was not a secure place. And I remember like when they would go out when I was 3 and 4 years old, that I would sit at the front door, just not certain they would come home.
Wow.
And that's, doesn't build a lot of security. And yet I was really doing okay, I guess. Like going forward, I did okay. So I had some real reserves in there, I guess. Sometimes I look back or I'll be talking about this and I'll think, how am I doing so well? But I am. So, I really didn't feel like I fit there. They were, not very nice to me. And they invited other people to be not very nice to me.
Wow,
And
that's terrible.
yeah, it's sad.
Did you have siblings? Did you have?
I did. I had an older brother and he was kind of the golden child. And I think because I was so straightforward in my approach, that wasn't a fit in my world. It just wasn't the way that especially I think my father wanted to be. And so it really was challenging of the person that I am, that I would ask for what I wanted and needed. And I would, kind of make statements about things. And that wasn't valued.
It sounds like they felt you didn't know your place. You were like a little kid.
I think that's right.
I'm saying it because I can relate to it from my own childhood also. I used to hope my mother and father would break up because there was so much fighting and carrying on.
Yeah. When they got separated the first time when I was 5, or I think I was 4 or 5, and I remember going to kindergarten and like telling my friends and being absolutely thrilled. Like I knew that would be better. And they were separated for a year. And then I don't really understand why, but they got back together for what I would call 17 more fun-filled years. That's in quotation marks.
Yeah.
And then they got divorced when I was 22. And I was grateful. I don't know how they stayed together. And I don't know if they would think they stayed together for the kids, but it's really interesting because, I have friends who are in situations where their marriage is not good. And I don't believe you're doing your children any favor by staying together. I mean, it was a very insecure household, and being able to have final answer. I was already getting married actually by the time they were getting divorced. And I'm quite certain that I was doing that because I, got married so young, and I'm still married to that same person. So it was a good decision on my part. It was
a good decision, but you wanted out of that house.
I wanted out of the house, and I wanted actually into my husband's family because my husband's parents, his mom in particular, befriended me when I was about 15. Her name is Carol. And she got to be friends with my mom, and she would call my house, and, we only had landlines then. And my mom was never home. And so Carol would chat with me. And then she started taking me out to lunch, and she truly was like the first adult who loved me unconditionally.
Wow.
And at 16 or 17, I told her that I thought John, her oldest son, was good looking, and oh my God, was he? He still really is, but he really was. And then, so I always talk about that we had an arranged marriage. And I'm very lucky because John's dad, Michael, also just really loved me. I basically moved into their house when I got out of college, and then John and I got married. And so I'm really lucky in that way. But what was kind of interesting is like for us as parents, John went into parenthood thinking it would be pretty easy because his parents made it look pretty easy. And I went into it knowing it would be very hard and that it would take a lot of work. And I actually started reading parenting books in high school. And I'm sure it was not about becoming a parent. It was mostly about wanting to understand if what I was experiencing was normal and what I could do to reparent myself. So I was already at that stage trying to find answers.
You were very involved and mature, like ahead of your time. Like you figured a lot out.
Yeah, I think again, I think I'm a pretty old soul, and I don't know that for sure. I would love to find out, but
Oh, I can tell you who to go to. We'll
good.
talk
I will
about
ask for that. I will ask for
We have a
that.
lot of
I've
people
always
like that.
wanted a regression, but so I really worked really hard at being a parent because I knew it would be very hard. And that worked out really well, actually. Our kids are 25 and 27, and we have deep, deep connection with them. And what's been so beautiful is I just always wanted them to be understood and seen and able to be their authentic self with me. And I think that they have. I think that they feel like they can share things with me, and that's really lovely. And I share myself with them. And that's also really lovely. And sometimes I say things and I think, is that too much? Did they need to know that? Like if I'm having trouble with my father or whatever, if I say, yeah, I'm having a bad thing because this is going on, I sometimes will say, is that too much for you? But they seem so open and so caring and so loving of me. And I just appreciate that they feel seen and I feel seen by them. And that's, we just have a deep, close, connected relationship. And I think that that's all part of this. Like I am just somebody who wants to talk about a lot of deep stuff. I'm not interested in small talk.
You're not
I'm interested
transactional.
in big talk.
You're not transactional.
Right. Oh no, I
Not at
am
all. I'm the
not
same way.
transactional.
We're high sensitives. That's what happens to that's
Yes.
where we go with that. I want to know if Carol understood what was going on with your parents.
I think she did. And she helped me understand a lot of what was going on with my parents. I was really
She was a
lucky.
good friend to do that too. And
And the other thing that I really have to credit my mom allowed it. My mom could have easily put the kibosh on that relationship and she could have felt jealous. And maybe she
yeah,
did. But she also, one of the things I really credit her with is that she knew she wasn't able to meet my needs. But a lot of parents would not allow the kid to get their needs met. That happens a lot where the parent will be envious or jealous or whatever, and they ruin that relationship that a kid has with an adult.
I've seen that happen.
And I was really lucky in that she allowed it. And I have, told her how very grateful I am for that and told her how difficult I'm certain that was for her. But that was a real gift that she allowed me to have that relationship. And I'm really pretty convinced that every young woman needs a deep, close relationship with a woman that is not their mother.
We can only make that happen throughout the world for everyone.
No question. No question. I find it a little bit different with sons, and I don't know if they feel this way, but I just always think that sons don't have to disentangle themselves from their mother in the same way that many daughters feel they need to. And certainly I felt that I needed to. And I didn't want to be like my mother. And a lot of the women I know don't want to be like their mother. Even if they think their mother is the greatest person in the world, they don't want to be their mother. And I just find with my kids that there doesn't seem to be that tension. And I'm really grateful for that. In fact, I really wanted to be a mother of boys because I thought that would be the case. I thought it would be a cleaner relationship. And it seems to have worked that way, at least for me.
I have a son and 3 grandsons, and I kind of agree with you. We could go on and talk about that. There's a lot of similarities between us as you're talking. So obviously you spoke about those taboo subjects, whatever you needed, to Carol.
Yes, I did. And she was open to those things. And the other thing is I just always was doing that in other relationships. Like I was a peer counselor. I remember a woman who was a very close friend of mine at the time, shared with me about her bulimia and knew that I would help her to get help. I helped young women who were worried that they were pregnant or had an STD. I just was good at that. And I was comfortable with that. And it was just okay for me. And they weren't necessarily even very close friends. And at that stage of my life, I had trouble having close friends. And so or at least I didn't feel close. Perhaps they felt close, but they were people that I could just help right away. And that was very nourishing to me, to help people get their needs met on things that they couldn't get their needs met otherwise.
Right.
And in college, I went to college in the mid 80s, and that's when AIDS was becoming, more well known. And I was teaching about AIDS at that time. I remember I was working on getting condoms in bathrooms at the fraternities and sororities and that. And this in the 80s, people weren't
You're
even
a problem
acknowledging
solver.
that.
You're a dynamic problem solver.
And I'm somebody who wants to acknowledge that things are happening and real, and let's deal with them. And I've always been that. And this piece just really fell into place for me when I was 40. So I didn't know that I was so comfortable talking about death until
I know that the death of your friend Michelle, did that happen when you were 40?
No, it was when I was 20. She got sick when I was 26.
Okay, so she kind of set you on your path, and then something else happened when you were 40. So tell us about that.
So when I was 26, Michelle, who I had known since 9th grade and whose husband I had been very close friends with since we were 4, she got diagnosed with a glioblastoma. So it's a terminal brain tumor. It's what John McCain had. Ted Kennedy had it. It's really bad. And, everybody would say you're young and you're strong and you'll beat it. And that's kind of how we approach these things.
Because they don't want to face that taboo subject.
That's right. And they're worried they'll make you feel bad and you'll make them feel bad, whatever. And I just didn't do that. Like I said to Michelle, what does this feel like? And she had a 10-month-old at the time she was diagnosed, and our older son was 2.5. And I just said, I'm here for you. I can talk about anything you need to say. And we did. We talked about deep, important things that, I'm just so grateful that we did. And it really led me to feel much more grace about her illness and death. And I think for her, it was really a relief. Even her closest people, it was very hard to talk about it because she didn't want to make them feel worse. And they didn't want to make her feel worse.
Wow.
So everybody was talking about it to other people, but it's very difficult to talk about to each other.
Right, except for you.
Yeah. And at least that's my feeling about it. She can't tell me right now, or she maybe could tell me, but I couldn't be sure. That is what she said. But what's amazing, we went 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago to Phoenix. Her son, Max, who was 2 when she died, just got married. Oh. And I'm going to start crying. So we went to his wedding. And it was in Phoenix, and it was so beautiful, and it was so powerful and special to be there. I haven't been deeply involved in his life. His dad, who had been one of my closest friends, got remarried, and they had 2 more children, and they live, 10 miles away. But those 10 miles have been a big divide because his life is so much different than my life now. And while I love him deeply, we don't see each other. So I haven't been deeply involved in Max's life. And yet there's just this real heart connection with us. And he came to me at the wedding and showed me that his wife had made these beautiful little charms made out of pictures of his mom and him as a baby and his grandmother. Yeah, his grandmother and him as a baby, because his grandmother just died a short while ago. And it was just, I don't know, it's just so meaningful. And I love that kid so much, and feel so grateful for that connection, and feel deeply connected to Michelle truly every minute of every day. And I really do think that experience of feeling like, yeah, I can talk about this stuff put me on that path. And it was not until more than a decade later that I heard from a friend that Jim Cohen, who owns Feldman's, was looking for someone to do prearranged funeral planning. And the truth is, I knew not one thing I had never done this. I have no background that says I should do this, but it was
What was your education? What was your, what
I
was
have
your,
a degree in communication. I had intended to
oh,
work in television. I
okay.
did some video work and I loved that work. But then I had kids and I just wasn't finding my career path. When I learned about this, it was literally a lightning bolt. And I went to Jim, who I've always known. He and I were in the same confirmation class in religious school. And I just went to him and I was like, I am the person for this job. He'd never had anyone in the role before. I got literally zero training. And that's been such a gift because figuring out how to create this program has made it so much better than most people who do what I do. Most people do it in this very specific way. And I didn't learn that specific way. And so it's made it be much more authentic to who I am versus here's this script of how you do it.
Well, it sounds to me like, from talking to you, it sounds to me like a lot of your heart goes into it and people relate to you from that way. And I would also tell you, not only past lives, but I know a bunch of people. I feel very certain that Michelle was at her son's wedding.
Oh,
and
for sure.
Would definitely come through with some messages. They're wonderful mediums who I've interviewed who could accomplish that for you. But Let me ask you this. What do you say to people? Exactly. What do you say to people that demystifies death? They don't always believe that this is an earth suit that's coming off one day, they think it's over when it's over, that demystifies death and helps them taste their mortality. And once you get that done with them, how does that help them to live a better, more meaningful life? I mean, we accomplish it spiritually because we believe that there is more. And, how do you get someone who doesn't believe in that?
Well, I don't know that I need them to know there's more. So for what I do, I am just trying to help them to acknowledge that, we all die. And what happens after that, I share, of course, that I am quite certain that there is something else. And I've had a number of experiences that prove that to me. Like I was with one of my clients, Bella, who was a Holocaust survivor, and she became a client. She was a client, but she became a friend, like a deep, close friend. And I became a deep, close friend to her. I met her when she was 86. And she was this very strong person. And she turned to me when she knew she needed hospice and she needed to figure out how to get that. So I helped her to get that, and then was deeply involved in all of that. And I was with her on the day of her death. And this is a person who had spent so much time trying to live. And her death was very challenging. It was very hard for her to let go. As you can imagine, this is not something she knew how to do.
Right.
And she had shared with me all the people that she had lost. So many people had died. All of her people died in the Holocaust. And then she got married and her husband, Jerry, died very young. He got TB in one of the DP camps, the displaced person camps. And so he died. And then she was so very traumatized that if somebody would do something that didn't live up to her expectation, she would cut them out. And so she lost lots of people that way as well. And I was always afraid that I would be one of those people who would disappoint her, and not so much that I would be it would be a problem for me if she cut me out, but then I would be another person that she lost. And so I just did not want that. So I went to her house and I knew she was in the midst of actively dying, and sat with her, and she said prayers for the people who died in the Holocaust every single day. And so I knew where the list of all those people were, and sat by her side and was telling her, Jerry's waiting for you. And I don't remember the other names of the other people who are waiting, and you need to go to them. And it was such a long process. And she would it felt like minutes between breaths. But then some noise would happen in another part of the house, and I could watch her, come back. And it was really terrible. But when she finally did die, it was literally like a light went out. So it was like, she's in her body, she's not in her body. And so it's very obvious to me that there is a soul. And I have felt that soul in many situations, but that one was just a visual, manifestation of, here's the soul, and now the soul's not in the body. So what is that? You know what I mean? That there has to be that life force, and that life force left.
That's right. Well, I experienced that with my husband when he died next to me in the car accident.
Yes.
The whole essence and beauty of who he was. I was just next to a body. But that beauty, that essence, that light in him, that was on the other side now. It was true. They went, so when you talk to her and that's how you handle that. So let's talk about funeral pre-planning and how it helps a family. How do you, first of all, do they approach you? How do you find each other? And what does funeral pre-planning do for them? I mean, you say that it avoids chaos and dysfunction, but let's talk about that. They're like coming in, they're nervous to see you anyway. They're not sure they want to do this. What am I doing?
Right. Sometimes they're really nervous. So at the beginning, I had to go and find them. So when I first started,
wait a minute, you knocked on doors? Are you?
No,
you think you're gonna die one day?
No, but some do that. Some people do.
Really?
I did not do that. And I'm very lucky because Feldman's, the funeral home in which I work, has a deep reputation and serves a niche. And so we serve everybody, but at that time we served the Jewish community almost entirely. And I thought, okay, how am I going to find people who are the right age, who would be open to this message? But I was really scared of talking to them because if I talk to them about this, they'll think I think they're going to die.
Right.
And it literally took me 2 or 3 years to wrap my head around the fact that I think they're going to die. I'm right. They're going to die. I'm not making that happen. That's just what happens. So now I'm real comfortable with that, but it took me a long time. So at the beginning, what I did is I went to an organization that served people in the right kind of community at the right kind of time of life and created this series called Before the Morning, MOURNING. And it's always hosted in a retirement community. And it's like several weeks in a row. And I bring in different speakers to talk about things that are really typically very spiritual based. People always say they want to know about wills and trusts, but they're lying. They don't come to that stuff. That, they want things that are more emotional, that touch them on a deeper level. And so that's what I do. So I'm putting one together for next fall, and I'm having a woman who's talking about solo aging, because a lot of people don't have children and they're very concerned about who's going to take care of me, who's going to take care of all my stuff. I have
2 friends who have expressed that to me.
Yeah. So it's
I'd love to see that when you come through with that. Let's talk about that another time. Let's come back on and talk about that.
Yeah, that might be a good person for you to have.
Yeah.
I'll write her down as a suggestion for you to interview her. Actually, she's really smart. So she's going to come. And then I am having a woman who is, I don't know that she would call herself a medium, but she's definitely an intuitive. And so she's going to talk about that we all have that capacity. And then I have a woman who is, an instructor at the Mortuary College in Denver, and she's going to talk about different traditions around the world. And then last but not least is a woman who started an incredible cemetery in Colorado that is called Colorado Burial Preserve. So it's a completely green cemetery. And people are very interested in that kind of stuff. So I've always done this. This is going to be my 14th or 15th season of Before the Morning. And so that was a great way for me to start connecting with people. And I'm like the host every time. So they get to know me and they get to realize that I am safe. And then they become part of my pipeline. So then I start reaching out to them to say, hey, have you considered doing these plans? Some people say, yeah, I've never considered it. I'm not going to consider it. Some people say, yeah, I have considered it, but now's not the right time. And so then I touch them again, in whatever time frame. And then some of them go, oh my God, I've been thinking about this for so long. I'm so grateful to talk to you. Let's have a conversation. And so then what we do is we sit down and really talk about what's meaningful to them, what are their values, and what method of caring for their body meets those values. So we're really the specialists in green options, and people don't really know about them so much. So I'm
Talk to us
really
about what are green options.
I will. So lots of people believe that fire cremation is good for the earth because they say to themselves, well, it's good that I'm not using up space. Fire cremation is actually horrible for the environment. Everything that is in our body, our mercury in our teeth, silicone in our breast implants, other things, just the burning itself is terrible for the atmosphere. And it takes as much gas as a cross-country road trip. And so it's just really a bad choice. And we talk about, the people in the funeral business talk about ash. There's really no such thing as ash. It's really ground bone.
Ooh.
So the fire burns away the tissue. And then what's left is the bone that's put through a pulverizer. And when it's in a fire cremation scenario, that bone is filled with gas. And so if you scatter it, there's no nutrients, and the gas is really bad for plants. And so it often will kill plants. In fact, one of my friends from college, Erin, her mom died, and she was fire cremated, and they wanted to plant a bush. And they put the cremated remains under it, and they're really, thrilled about that. And then it immediately died. And so then it's another death. So a very painful situation. So people don't really know. And so I'm real straightforward about stuff, which can be, that can backfire sometimes.
Well, it's off-putting if they're really determined to do that, and that's their tradition, and there are cultures that is their tradition.
No question. But I'm not talking to people who are typically from the culture that you need to destroy the body for the soul to do its work. Those people are not typically my clients, but it can be off-putting because they don't want to know. They just don't want to know. And, and I don't, quite honestly, I don't care what they choose. I don't have any judgment about what method of disposition they choose. Just want them to make a decision based in knowing what they're choosing. And so sometimes that absolutely backfires. In fact, once Jim, who owns Feldman's, was at a cemetery where we do a lot of burying. And this woman came running out and said, Jim, Jamie told somebody that when they're cremated, their bones are pulverized. And he said, yeah. And she said, we shouldn't be telling them that. He said, is it untrue? She said, no, it's true, but we don't want them to know. And Jim said, well, we do want them to know. That's how I demystify that. You get the real truth from me. And I'll say, please tell me if you don't want to know. And I'll tell you only as much as you want to know. But if you're making a decision and you think that you're doing something that's environmentally sustainable, you should know that it's not. And there are other options.
So what are the options that are environmentally sustainable?
So in Colorado, there's something called alkaline hydrolysis, which is being known as aquamation. It's actually what Desmond Tutu had. So instead of fire being used to burn away the tissue, it's an alkali that's similar to liquid soap and water. And that rapidly decomposes the tissue, and then the bones are left. And they are put through a pulverizer, but they are filled with the nutrients still. And so if you want to scatter them, they actually will help plants grow. And the water becomes really the ultimate miracle grow. And so that can be used on plants. It can go to a flower farm. It's really beneficial for the environment. There's also in Colorado a method called natural reduction. And that's where the body gets put into a vessel along with organic matter that's 4 times the body weight. And after about 3 months, everything has turned to soil. So there's nothing human about it at the end. The bones do have to be pulverized in the mid-range because it's not long enough for them to turn to soil, but they go back in and then they also become soil. And by the end, It's not mom anymore. It's literally dirt that is used to reinvigorate the earth, and the earth needs it. And the other choice, which is a very old choice, is green burial. And we've been the specialists in that for 90 years. And it's no embalming. There's really no reason to remove blood and add chemicals to the body to preserve it. Sometimes there's a reason, but it's very rare that you need it. And then we bury in a biodegradable container or no container at all, depending
Is that
on
like
what
a coffin, or is there, are there?
Yeah, biodegradable casket or nothing, just a shroud, whatever somebody wants, and the body goes back to the earth. My understanding is that typically everything would go back to the earth in 4 to 6 years. And one of the things that can be so nice about green burial is in addition to the fact that it is really good for the earth, it's really good for people's bereavement. Having rituals surrounding the death of someone they love, taking them from where they are to where they need to be, can really be powerful and healing. And then if they need to go back, they can. And there's a permanent memorial for somebody. And it really can be a beautifully healing way to process a death.
I've experienced something like that, and I agree with you. It really gives you an opportunity to do a lot of grieving and be surrounded by community around it and all of that. What do you deal with? I mean, your specialty is having these difficult conversations with people. So do you have any insights or approaches about how to have difficult conversations about sensitive issues, which we could use not just about death, but about everything on this planet? Any advice for people? They got to talk to their son about this, or their daughter, or their boss, or whatever. What's the Jamie advice about how you have those conversations?
I just think that vulnerability is really a strength, and authenticity and courage are really strengths. And so I think that if we can embrace those things and embrace however we're showing up, if we are scared and say, hey, I'm really nervous to have this conversation with you, but I feel like it's important, let's give it a try. I think that that's really, really helpful. Just opening the door can be so helpful. I once had a client who called me and she said, my parents are aging and I really want them to put funeral plans in place. But if I'm afraid to talk to my mom about it. And I said, well, just do. I just need you to know that it does not make anything happen. Just give it a try. Tell her that you were talking to me and you just realized you need to do this. And so she did. She went to her mom and her mom was like, oh my God, I'm so grateful you brought this up. I've wanted to talk to you about it, but I was afraid it would scare you. So I just think that those things are so important. And I would say start practicing from a very young age. Really do this with your children. I was just listening to This American Life, actually. And there was a story on there about this classroom of third graders. And there was this drawing some kid made. They named it Bob's Sister. And it was on the wall. And then one day it disappeared. And they had all these theories as to what happened to Bob's sister. And they were talking about it all the time. And they were very upset by it. And ultimately, the kids decided they needed to have a funeral for Bob's sister. And they did.
Wow.
And the teacher just talked about how it became this very emotional and expressive thing that these kids could do in this classroom. Like there were kids crying. He was pretty sure that like one kid who was really very upset, his dog had just died. So maybe it allowed him to tap into that. But here are all these 8-year-olds practicing. And what a gift to these kids. So I just really think that we need to allow children to be part of this stuff. Sometimes we want to protect them from it, and that's not good. We need to allow them to practice, instead of when their goldfish dies, running out to get a new identical goldfish so they don't know. Have a practice funeral for that goldfish. Say some nice words about that goldfish and bury him in the backyard or send him to burial at sea, whatever you need. But, allow your kids to be part of that. Invite them into funerals. a grandparent or a friend dies or whatever, invite them to come in. Don't make them. If they're little kids and they're like, I really don't want to go, that's fair. But allow them to make that decision on their own. So many of us try to protect them from this reality when it's such a great time for them to practice. The other thing is to really just be honest about stuff. There's an incredible place in Utah called the Sharing Place. And it's a place for kids who've had a death of a parent to go and have support. And you'd be shocked at how many kids have a death of a parent before they're 18. Before COVID, that statistic was 20% of kids have a death of a parent before they turn 18. And I'm quite certain that that has gone up with COVID. I don't know the stat. But this place, what the kids do is they tell the real story of what happened. And being able to talk about it using the correct language allows them to feel less isolated and less alone. And that is a gift.
Absolutely.
We need to learn how to approach these things.
I was involved with the charitable organization for a while, and their goal was to offer peer support for children who had lost parents, siblings, and the peer support with these children who had all had losses made a dramatic difference in their lives.
No question.
Amazing.
If they can feel like they're not weird. The
No.
thing I'm really convinced about and committed to is using the correct language about this stuff. So I say somebody died. And even if I believe, and I do believe that they went somewhere else,
But
I
their
don't
body
say
died.
their body died. Their soul went somewhere else. I find it so fascinating. We have all these mass shootings that I am now going to start calling terrorist attacks. But we have all of these. And when I hear people talk about them, like on the news or whatever, they'll say like a victim of the Buffalo shooting passed away. And I'm yelling at the radio, they didn't pass away. They were murdered. Don't call it pass away. And so I think that is so detrimental to our ability to deal with lots of things. If we make it sound like it's just this, I don't know, it's just not real.
I hear you. So let me ask you this in your direct way. What do you teach people about dealing with the waves of grief and it not being a linear process? Because that's another part. All right. So person was murdered or they died or whatever happened. Now you've got the people who survived them and they're going through all this emotion. How do you handle that, Jamie?
Well, what I really want them to understand is that they don't know much about grief. And whatever happens, however they do it, is the right way for them. And so we think, because the only thing most of us have ever learned about grief is what we learned in 9th grade psychology. And that's when we talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And, we hear about these stages and we think, okay, the first stage is going to be denial. And the next stage is anger. And I don't even remember all the stages. But first of all, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was studying people who were accepting their own inevitable death. She wasn't talking about people who were bereaved, who had had the death of a loved one. And she never intended for it to be linear. It was just a way to write it up. And so I try to help people to understand that it is not that way. It isn't what we learned. And we just have to do it in our own way and to understand that we can survive it. And if we allow it to come in and wash over us and allow ourselves to sit in it for whatever time frame we need, that's better. It doesn't feel good. I'm sure it doesn't
hurts
feel
like
good.
Crazy. But
yeah, but that's better. And the more that we push against it and push it away, the worse off we're going to be. The other thing that I really try and teach people is how to be with people who are grieving, to just sit there quietly. Don't feel compelled to have answers and really just show up. That's the thing that so many people believe. There are these magic words that will fix things. but they don't know the magic words. And so they're terrified. And they just really think, well, since I don't know exactly what to say, I'm just not going to say or do anything. And that's a lot worse. I also teach people, instead of saying things like, just tell me what I can do, or let me know if I can be helpful, to really say what they're going to do. Can I bring you a meal? Can I come clean your house? Can I come sit with you on Tuesdays? Can I take your child to school? Can I walk your dog? Can I bring the trash cans to the curb every week? Say what you're willing to do. And that person can say yes or no. But when you say to them, just let me know if I can do anything, first of all, they don't know what they need.
And they're
at all.
grieving. They can't even think
Right.
straight.
They can't think straight, and they're not going to ask. It's very, very hard. I mean, it's very, very hard to ask. You want people to know. So if somebody can show up and just say, here's what I'm willing to do, does this work for you? Or I can do this or this or this, then just, that's so much of a gift to people. And you need to keep showing up. If they are your close people, put the death date in your calendar and reach out to them. Put the birthday of that person in your calendar and reach out to them. Use that person's name. I don't know, Irene, if this happened to you, but a lot of times the loved one's name never gets said again.
Not in my case, not at all. But yes, I've seen that happen. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're afraid we're going to make them feel worse if we remind them that their person died. I guarantee they remember.
They remember. And not only that, instead of it being something to be so upset that they have to face it, their person's gone. How about the fact that those memories and talking about that person is actually a blessing, and you're not negating that part of their lives, that they had that person in their lives.
And go with them in the way they want. Like, I was just with some clients who came to do their own funeral plan, and they shared with me that their son, Brian, had died. And I said, would you tell me a little bit about Brian? And the mother said, do I need to? I don't want to. And I said, nope. You don't, who am I? She doesn't need to share her person with me if she doesn't want to. But I still think it's a good idea to say, I'd love to know about your son, Brian.
Well, you're not, and many people really thrive by continuing to remember the loved one who died and honoring them. How do people talk to kids about death? How do you advise that about death and grief? This little kid, be he 8 or 10 or 3, and they just lost mom or dad or the dog or whoever. How do you advise people to talk to kids about that?
I think you have to do it with the advice like that you have about teaching them about sex. Like, you have to go with them where they are, and ask them questions about what their understanding is about this. I would never, never, never tell somebody that somebody just went to sleep. That can terrify them. Help them to understand that while everybody dies, there are other people who love them are going to be around for a long time, because, this is scary for them. And they're really concerned about mostly is what's going to happen to them. And so that's one thing I would really encourage, is whether you've had somebody die or not, when kids are little kids, to talk about all the people that they have. And hopefully they do have some people, like with my own children, when they were young, I would just talk about all the grownups who love them. And just so they know how safe they are. And I would just allow them to say whatever it is that they need to say. And again, allow them to come to the communal events that are happening around a death. Allow them to do whatever it is that they need to express it. Tell them the truth about things. Don't try to cover things up. Like, if God forbid somebody took their life, you can share with them, Daddy really had a very bad illness that made him feel like he was better off dead. And so he took his own life. And it's because Dad had a really bad illness that made him do that. and allow them to really express things and to talk about it in a real, honest, and upfront way. Because those things that we keep in the dark are a lot scarier. And when we turn on the lights, it's easier to know that we can survive.
Well, you can make up a story or you can make a fantasy, which is a lot worse
Yeah.
than the reality. If
It
you're
almost always is much
right,
worse.
right? So tell me
Yeah.
also, Jamie, you have an inspiring story about visiting the cemetery recently, which was 25 years after your friend Michelle's death. Talk about coming full cycle. You want to share that with us?
Absolutely. I shared a little bit about going to her son Max's wedding. And the fact that Mark, her husband, and I, who had been such close friends since we were 4, we're just not that connected anymore. And we love each other deeply, but we don't see each other regularly. We're just not in each other's lives. And that hurts me. And for many, many, many years, it would just really cause me a lot of pain. And I sort of had this story in my head that I'm just not that important, or I don't know. I just had some things.
We tend to create stories, don't we?
Yes, we do. So recently her mom died. Michelle's mom died, and I went to the memorial service, but I wasn't invited to the burial. That was private. The memorial service was beautiful and wonderful. And the next day I said to my husband, I really need to go to the cemetery. And I did. And I was quite certain I'd know exactly where Michelle was buried. I could totally picture myself there. I was absolutely wrong. So I had to get in touch with Mark to say, tell me where she is. So I found the grave, and I stood there and I cried so hard. And it was literally like she had died the day before. But what I realized is I was grieving the loss of potential. I was grieving the trips the 4 of us would have gone on had she lived. I was grieving our children being raised together had she lived. So, I didn't get that future. And again, Mark has a wonderful life, but it isn't with me.
But you were impacted. You were grieving your disappointment.
Right. I was grieving my losses. Yes. And my losses were not so much Michelle, because Michelle's with me all the time. For some reason, I always feel like she's on my left shoulder. But it was really like I missed out on all of this stuff because she died. And it was really interesting. I'll share with you. I haven't shared this much, but I was listening to music while I was there. And when I got to her grave, the Dolly Parton version of I Will Always Love You came on. And there's this whole talking piece. And it was literally Michelle talking to me. I mean, it was a message from Michelle, a deep message. And
piece that Dolly said, or
it was Dolly saying it, but it was Michelle's words. Yes. And then another song came on, and that didn't mean anything to me. And I said, send me another one. I want another message. And then You've Got a Friend came on. And it was just, really, I'm going to cry again. I know she's with me all the time, but it just was really a nice validation that she's with me all the time.
That's beautiful. And speaking of that, what do you tell people when they come to talk to you about their pre-funeral planning and all? Do they ask you about the afterlife? Do they ever ask you about communicating through mediums, or does any of that ever come up?
It does sometimes. And it just depends on where they are in their journey. Like I was doing an arrangement with a couple. The wife had cancer for a long time. And she had 21-year-old twins. And she was very worried about, what is their life going to be like without her? And she was a scientist. And so she was sure there was nothing more, because there's no proof of there's anything more. And I said, I hear you. I know there's more. And here's why. And I gave her some thoughts, and I shared with her about my friend Bella dying, and I just kind of shared it with her, and I said, I don't know how you receive that, but I just want you to know I am certain there's more. She died pretty recently. I actually should try and see if she'd come give me some validation about what she believes now that she died. But also with her, like, she was going to have fire cremation, and then we just really talked about how if she got buried, that would be really healing for her family. And that's ultimately what she did choose to do. And so I'm sure that our conversation was helpful to her. The other one that I can think of right now was a woman whose husband died by suicide. And I just did an arrangement with her.
Wow.
And, she just shared with me how she's sure Ari is out there. And the two of us were both going to see a medium. And I said to her, I'm really that day, it was a large group reading. And I said, I'm going to really put out, my thoughts to Ari to make sure he comes through. And he did. Yeah. And I saw her afterwards, and she just gave me such a big hug. And she just said, thank you so much. I didn't really do anything, but I was there.
Heard you.
He heard me.
He heard
and
you.
It was more people asking for him to come through. He might have just come through anyway, but I'm so glad that he did. She needed it.
That's beautiful. And tell me, in what ways does embracing our mortality and making plans to give our loved ones a ritual to process death become an important healing gift to them? And do you have any special offers for our Grief and Rebirth audience today?
Absolutely. I do. When we take care of these things now, we get a lot of peace of mind. And it's a way for us to take care of our loved ones, even when we're not physically present to do it. It's really the first time when somebody dies that we have to make decisions on their behalf without them even being physically present. And so it's such a gift to just say, okay, this part is done. It's like I'm here holding your hand. You can know you're doing exactly the right thing. That's such a gift. And I would say for my clients that do it, it's such peace of mind for them. And it's a way for them to just start acknowledging the fact that we're all mortal and we are going to step out of these bodies at some point. And that's okay. So that's really a wonderful thing for them. And as far as offers for our audience, if anybody is in the Colorado area and would like to put plans in place, I would be honored to help you. And if you just mention this podcast, I would be happy to give you $150 off of any plan that you would make.
That's great. Just tell them Irene sent you. Just everyone.
That's right. Just say Irene sent me. And we do everything that's available. So we do fire cremation, aquamation, body composting, and burial.
I have another thought that I'm going to ask you. Do people ever ask you about having a celebration of their lives? Because I hear a lot about that these days.
Yeah.
They go I want give me the traditional thing, but I want a party,
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, that whole idea. I don't want anybody to be sad when I die. That's what I hear a lot. I want it to just be a big party. And I am a big believer that a lot of people don't feel celebratory. And so when we're telling them that they're supposed to be, they feel like they're doing it wrong. And we're not allowing them to access whatever emotion they might have. So I am not a fan of a celebration of life. I always really believe, like, if you want people to celebrate, do it while you can be there physically and hear all the nice things they say about you. Like, I think that's a beautiful thing. And then I think a memorial service, a funeral, those things are really powerful, and allowing people to feel whatever they feel. That doesn't mean there can't be moments of laughter. There could be lots of moments of laughter, but not sort of saying, here's what we're doing today. But if it, different cultures have different ways of doing it. And truly, for some cultures, it really is a celebration that they're going to be with God. So however your culture approaches it, I honor that. But I think that a lot of secular people want to tell their people not to cry. And I'm not really sure why. I mean, why can't we be sad that somebody's dead? Even if we know that there's somewhere else after them, and I know that, but I'm still sad they're not with me.
Right.
And that's okay.
That's okay. I hear you. And what is the Jamie tip for finding joy in life?
I have really been working on this. I have not always been somebody who can feel joyful, or at least I don't label it that way. And I've really been working on it in the last couple of years. I really want to approach my life with a lot more joy. And I'm learning some things that are really fun and wonderful. I recently, after 30 years, went back to skiing. And I will tell you, that is such an empowering, joyful experience. I love it so much. So that's,
And you're in Colorado. You're in, like, how do you beat that? I mean,
there you go. How do you beat that? So that's been fabulous. And it is just this new experience. My family's all been skiing for years, and I just never went with them. And it's fun to be with them, to be with friends who we've
look at how
always
you
gone to the
allowed
mountains.
yourself to change, and you allowed yourself to expand and to enjoy them more, and enjoy your present moments with them more, and enjoy what they're enjoying.
And to recognize that I've had this identity for 30 years that I'm not a skier, that doesn't have to stick. Now I have a different identity. I am a skier and I love it. So that is, one of the things that is, I think, really important in having a joyful life, is to say, okay, I haven't always been this way, but I can open to new things. And I'm also learning Spanish again. Ooh. Which has been really, it's something that's always really bothered me, that I'm only an English speaker. I think that as Americans, it's upsetting to me, like, that we expect everybody else to speak English, even if we're in a different non-English speaking country, and most people do. And so we just kind of can just be American there. And it's always really bothered me. So now I'm back to learning Spanish. And my husband and I were just in Costa Rica, and I tried using it, and it was sort of uncomfortable, and that felt good too.
Being on the edge of uncomfortable is not a bad thing. I think I spend most of my time on the edge of uncomfortable, because you're expanding, you're learning new things, you're taking those steps, and you can always take a step backward if it doesn't work out for you. Right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. That's when we grow. You're exactly right.
Right? So, Jamie, I want to thank you for so courageously helping people to recognize that their lives are finite, which empowers them to live their lives more fully and more meaningfully in each moment. And I want to thank you from my heart for this very illuminating interview, filled with these important insights about death and grief for our Grief and Rebirth podcast audience today. And here's a loving reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com, and make sure to follow us and like us at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, and wherever you get your social media. As I like to say, to be continued. Many blessings. Bye for now. And thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you, Irene.
I really, 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 really appreciate it, Jamie. Thank you.